In August of 1800, at Weymouth, Princess Sophia was carried feverish from a lodging house, while the nation was told she was suffering from dropsy, a swelling of the body, and by the next morning the swelling was gone, and according to household whispers, so was a newborn child. If stories like this hold you, subscribing costs nothing, and more untold royal history is already queued behind this one. The bell means you will not miss it. Dropsy was the word the court used. A swelling of the body. It explained everything and revealed nothing. Doctors reached for it constantly in the 1700s because it could mean almost any bloating, any unexplained weight the body carried. It was tidy, it was respectable, and it asked no further questions. But here is the problem with dropsy. It does not vanish overnight. A swelling that had grown quietly for months does not simply melt away between dusk and breakfast. Sophia's did. One evening she was ill and enormous. The next she was thin, exhausted, and alone. Whatever had left her body left in the dark, wrapped and carried out of that seafront lodging while the rest of England slept. That child, if the whispers are true, was the secret the fifth daughter of King George III would carry to her grave. To understand how impossible this should have been, you have to understand the house she lived in. Sophia was one of 6 princesses, born to King George III and Queen Charlotte. 6 daughters, and their father could not bear to let a single one of them go. The sisters had a name for their own lives. They called it the nunnery. Not with affection, they meant it bitterly. They were grown women, some of them well into adulthood, kept close at Windsor with no husbands, no households of their own, and almost nothing to fill their days but embroidery, music, and the slow passing of time. Picture that. Grown women, daughters of a king, with no husbands, no freedom, and almost nothing to do but wait. The cruelty of it was not carelessness, it was fear. George III was terrified of losing his daughters to foreign courts, terrified of an unsuitable match, terrified of a scandal that might touch the crown. So he solved the problem by making sure nothing happened to any of them at all. He kept them idle, watched, and unmarried, and he told himself that was love. Of all the sisters, Sophia was among the most closely watched. She was delicate, often unwell, and clever in a quiet way that people noticed. She was not the sort anyone expected to cause trouble. She was small, obedient, and almost never out of someone's sight. A dresser here, an attendant there, a doctor never far away. The days were mapped for her down to the hour, which is exactly what makes Weymouth so extraordinary, because somewhere inside that constant supervision, inside a life where she was rarely left alone in a room, Princess Sophia became pregnant. So how, under a roof where she was never left alone, did Princess Sophia end up carrying a child? That single question has trailed her for more than 200 years. Not whether it happened. The evidence for that is stronger than the palace ever wanted. The question is how it was managed, hidden and erased. And beneath it sits a second question, sharper and older, that the family found far harder to answer. By whom? Who was the father of a child, born to a watched, unmarried princess in a household designed to make such a thing impossible? Contemporary letters and later biographers name one man again and again, an equerry more than 30 years older than her, a man with a large purple birthmark spread across his face, a man the courtiers around Sophia could not believe a princess would ever love. The man the letters named was General Thomas Garth, an equerry. That means a household officer who managed the horses and rode in attendance on the royal family, a familiar figure in the stables and the corridors, trusted, uniformed, always near. Garth was more than 30 years her senior, and across one side of his face he carried a large purple birthmark that no portrait ever quite explained away. That is the detail the court could not get past. Sophia was young, delicate, and clever. Garth was ageing, plain, and disfigured. Read the letters yourself, and you feel the courtier's disbelief. This man, of all the men in her father's household, this ageing rider with the stained face was the one a princess had chosen. Some found it easier to believe there had been no choice at all, but that is a shadow for later. What is not in doubt is what happened to the child. A boy was born, and the boy was given away. He went first to a family in Weymouth named Charland, tailors, ordinary people who live by needle and thread in a coastal town. Imagine it, a king's grandson handed through a back door into a tailor's rooms to be raised among bolts of cloth and other people's coats. No title, no name that meant anything. Just a baby the palace needed to be somewhere else. He did not stay a tailor's charge for long. Garth himself took the boy in and raised him, and the child was named Thomas Garth after the equerry. So the man the letters accuse of fathering him also fed him, housed him, and gave him his own name. Whatever else that was, it was not the behaviour of a stranger, and then the record was scrubbed. This is the part that should make you angry. There is no christening entry in the royal registers, no acknowledgement, no line in the official family tree where a grandson of George III should sit. He was made to disappear before he could ever appear. The boy existed in Weymouth, in a tailor's house, and then in Garth's. But on paper, in the only paper that counted, he was never born at all. Think about what that took. A secret royal birth is not one silent doctor and a locked door. It is a whole, quiet machine. It is the dresser who laced and unlaced her mistress and saw the shape of her body change month by month. It is the attendants who carried away the linen. It is the servants who heard the word dropsy repeated at the door and understood exactly what dropsy really meant. A swelling that explained everything and revealed nothing. Every one of those people could have ended the princess with a single sentence in the right ear. Not one of them did. At the centre of that silence stands one figure, one of Sophia's own women, an attendant, close enough to be trusted with the truth, is said to have carried it for the rest of her service. Not for a week, while the fever passed. For years. Think about what that silence cost. One woman holding a secret that could destroy her mistress, saying nothing, day after day, while she brushed her hair and closed her curtains and stood behind her in company. And here is the thing the whole story turns on. In a house built entirely on appearances, that silence was the price of survival, and it was paid by the women. Sophia paid it with a son she could never call her own. The servant beside her paid it with a lifetime of holding her tongue. The men did not pay. Garth kept his post and his name. The court moved on. It was the princess and her attendant, the two people with the least power in that room, who carried the weight the palace could not be seen to carry. But there was a darker rumour at court, one the family found far harder to face. It whispered that the father was not Garth at all, but Sophia's own brother, Ernest, Duke of Cumberland, the most hated of all the royal sons, and that Garth was only the older man, willing to take the blame and the boy. Think about why that rumour frightened them more than any of the rest. A princess and an equerry was a scandal. Yes, but a familiar kind, the sort of thing that could be paid off and hushed. A princess and her own brother was something else. If the whisper was true, then the boy given to the tailor's family in Weymouth was not just illegitimate. He was the product of a sin the family could barely name aloud. Ernest, Duke of Cumberland, was already the most feared of George III's sons, a man courtiers cross rooms to avoid, attach his name to Sophia's child, and the palace was no longer protecting a reputation. It was protecting the whole idea of itself. And here is the frustrating part. It can be neither proved nor swept away. There is no confession, no letter that settles it. Only two versions of the same August night, both circulating in the same drawing rooms. Garth, the ageing equerry with the purple birthmark, or Cumberland, the hated brother. Take your pick. The evidence leans toward Garth, but the leaning is not the same as the truth, and Sophia herself never helped anyone decide. That is the detail that stays with you. Father or shield, Garth or her brother. She never publicly confirmed a word of any of it. Not once, across the decades she had left to live. She let the silence stand, in a house built on appearances, saying nothing was the only power she had, and she used it to the end. So strip away the whispers and see what is actually left to measure. She never married. A daughter of the king, clever, and once described as the prettiest of the sisters, and no husband ever came. She never openly acknowledged her son. The boy raised as Thomas Garth grew up a few miles from a mother who could never call him hers, and she made no move to close that distance. He made his. The grown Thomas Garth, once he understood who he was, came looking, and not with affection. He had gathered documents about his own birth, papers that pointed straight at the royal family, and he tried to use them to extract money from the palace. Sit with the cruelty of it. The son she gave up came back not for a mother, but for money. The threat rattled them. The papers were eventually smothered, and the boy, who was made to disappear from the record, was pushed back into silence a second time. Sophia went on living, into old age, quietly, always inside the family's careful orbit, watched to the last as she had been watched from the start. Her eyes failed her, and she went blind, spending her final years in a dim London room, dependent on the very people who had managed her disgrace. Dutiful, unmarried, unacknowledged, the obedient princess the nation had been shown, aged into exactly the woman the palace had always wanted her to be. If a story kept this well, holds you. Subscribing costs nothing, and there are more of these already lined up behind it. The bell notification is the only way you will actually see them, because the last thread of this belongs not to Sophia, and not to Garth or Cumberland, but to the woman who stood beside her. Managing a royal birth in secret took more than one silent doctor. It took an attendant who knew what dropsy really meant, who understood that the swelling which vanished in a single night had a name and a face, and a future somewhere in Weymouth. That attendant was trusted with all of it, and she carried it, the child, the name, the mother's secret, for the rest of her service and into her own grave, protecting a princess who could never protect herself. No memoir, no deathbed reveal, no price, just a silence kept until there was no one left to keep it from. That is what survives. The official record gave the nation a swelling and a diagnosis, a single soft word that explained everything and revealed nothing. And beneath it lived a woman who was never allowed to say she was a mother. Two truths. A diagnosis on paper, and a child no one would let her name. Which one do you believe was her real life? The answer was buried with a loyal servant who never told, and Sophia took the rest of it with her into the dark.